So we have a basic loop and some passing sidings, but what comes next? Adding a little bit of interest with interchanges and industries and even how to operate it, coming up on JC's Riptrack. Hi there, my name is John and welcome to JC's Riptrack. If this is your first time here and you're looking for advice and tips on how to transform your plastic models into something that looks like it belongs on the rails today, then click on subscribe and that little bell icon so you can be notified every time there's a new video. For those of you who started with a loop, what sorts of industries did you have on your layout? How did you represent them? Please let me know in the comments section below. Railroads are all about the movement of goods or people from one place to another. That is their entire purpose. Even tourist railroads are about moving passengers around, even if they return to the same point. For some, there is a magic in simply watching these behemoths ply the rails and watching hundreds of tons of steel and cargo roll by. But if you think about it, every single car that goes by came from somewhere and is going somewhere else. And we can do that on our layouts. The last video in this series showed the basics when it comes to starting with a loop, how to break the loop into scenes using backdrops, as well as adding passing sidings in order to be able to run more than one train. This basic setup can go a long way in creating a workable layout. In fact, if you're doing a passenger-based layout, this might be all you need. However, in doing a freight-based railroad, having a few places along the lines where one can deliver or pick up goods gives a great reason as to why this section of railroad exists. Not only that, we can use a couple of tricks to create the illusion that the railroad is connected to the wider world. We can do this by adding what are called spur tracks, places where rail cars are left to be loaded or unloaded. On a small layout like mine, most of these are going to be stub-ended spurs to distinguish them from passing sidings. If you're lucky enough to have a larger layout, some of these spurs can be double-ended, but at least for this video, all my spurs end with a bumper. The spurs that I'm adding in this video are essentially a chicken and egg kind of thing. Really, they should be added all at the same time because they don't make any sense without the other. However, I have to start someplace. For the purposes of this video, all three types of spurs are effectively universal industries. It means that any type of car can be delivered to them and any type of car can originate there. While my own layout will eventually have more concrete industries and perhaps even concrete itself, this at least gets us started with some basic operations. Now, one of the additional benefits of working with Unitrack is that swapping track and adding things in and out of evolving layout is very easy to do. Interchangeability and modularity are part of how the whole system is designed. And while I can explore this in more depth, I'll save that for another video as not all of you are working with Unitrack. But for the purposes of this video, all you need to know that a number 6 turnout has exactly the same straight length as an S186 piece of track, and the turning portion is exactly the same radius as the length of a piece of R718-15 curve track. In other words, the straight part is 186 millimeters long, and the curve has a radius of 718 millimeters and covers a 15-degree arc. So anywhere that you have an S186 straight or an R718 curve, you can drop one of these turnouts in without changing the rest of the track configuration. You'd think they planned it that way. Well, I know that I did. Adding these number 6 turnouts into the loop creates these 3 spur tracks. If you're working with HO scale Unitrack, you can do something similar as the turnouts are matched with similar lengths of both turnouts and curves. So let's start with the interchange. Interchanges represent an entry-exit point for traffic coming on and off the layout. It essentially represents the connection with the wider world. It serves as a universal industry where any type of car can come on and off the layout, and the types of cars can change between when you operate it. An interchange can take a few different shapes. The module that I created for my club's traveling layout has a more complex arrangement, but for this layout, the interchange is simply a track that connects to the outside loop of the layout. And on my layout, this track will also serve as a staging track and may even connect to a future staging yard. But for the most part, this serves as my primary interchange track on the layout. An easy spur that can also be added is what is called a team track. It's essentially a spur track with a ramp or a parking lot where various companies can truck goods to and from and transfer material to and from railroad cars. On modern railroads, this is often called a transloading facility, where goods are transferred to and from railcars. One doesn't need to have a lot in the way of buildings, as the tracks are simply beside a parking lot where trucks can position themselves beside railcars and the material can be loaded and unloaded. So far, this is the only track that is on the inside of the loop of my layout, but tracks like this can appear almost anywhere on your layout. The third type of universal industry is a port, and while it is unlikely that these tracks on my layout will be a port in the final version, they might. Having a port where goods are offloaded from ships and onto rail cars, or the other way around, is a great source and destination for traffic. In fact, one could even create an entire switching layout based around a port. Either way, this is a great way to have 3 different types of universal industries on the layout and all ready to go. But now we get to operate them. Beyond seeing how the passing sidings work in the last video, we can now operate our first cargo delivering train. And while I will do more on operations a little later and with some input from people who know it much better than I do, here's a really basic way to operate these 3 track types together. Now, the way that I have set this up, I have a train waiting on the interchange ready to deliver its cargo. On the team track and on the port tracks are cars that are ready to be picked up. The goal of this basic session is to drop off cars from the interchange and pick up cars from the team and port tracks, respectively. Since each of these track types can supply and receive any type of car, it makes it easy for this first session. Cars dropped off at a given location don't necessarily even have to be the same type, at least for what I'm doing in this video. As we add more tracks and more complex track arrangements with specific industries, that's going to change a bit, but creating an operational plan will then come into play. For right now though, it's a little bit more random. On the transloading or team track, we have some covered hoppers that are now empty and need to be taken back to where they can be filled with a new load. The 2 spurs of the port track are housing some tanker cars and boxcars that have been recently loaded and are ready to be transported to their destination. On the incoming train, we have some grain covered hoppers, a pair of empty gondolas, and some empty tanker cars. For this video, they're all grouped together by type. The gondolas need to be delivered to the transloading or team track, while the grain-covered hoppers and tankers need to be delivered to the port. Specifically, the grain hoppers need to be delivered to the same track as the boxcars, and the empty tank cars need to be swapped out for the loaded tank cars that are already at the port. So let's get started. I have the incoming train starting on the interchange track and pulling onto the main, and because of the way the turnouts are set up, the train does a complete loop so that it can be properly positioned to both deliver and receive cars from the transloading facility. The first task is to pull the covered hoppers out of the team track spur in order to make room for the incoming gondolas. As you can see here, I leave part of the train on the passing siding, leaving the gondolas still connected with the locomotives. I then hook up the covered hoppers to the gondolas, pull them out of the spur, and then connect them with the rest of the train. I then take the 2 gondolas and push them back into the team track where they are dropped off or spotted. Next, I reconnect the train with the freshly picked up covered hoppers and make my way around to the port tracks. Here the procedure is the same, but twice over. I start by picking up and dropping off the tank cars, and I then pick up the box cars, replacing them with the grain cars. I'm deliberate about placing the tanker cars in the middle of the train for safety reasons. There are lots of regulations about how not placing cars with hazardous materials next to locomotives and their crews. Once everything is delivered and picked up, the last thing that I need to do is what's called a runaround move, so that the power is now positioned so it can now take the train out onto the interchange, effectively leaving the layout. Alternatively, I could treat the interchange as another spur and back the cars into the siding, but in this case I wanted to show that the operation of the train coming on and then leaving the layout for this short operating session. So there we go, new industry tracks added and a basic way to operate them. When building a layout, having places for your trains to go to and from is a part of the plan. It also helps build a theme and creates modeling ideas for your layout as it grows. For my layout, I will be keeping the transloading track as exactly that, as this kind of spur track is common throughout the Canadian Maritime provinces. I haven't decided exactly what will happen with the port tracks yet, but they may become a specific industry. However, in an upcoming video, I will be adding even more interest and challenge to the layout that will involve more in the way of switching and moving cars, so stay tuned for that. So while this series isn't quite my usual weathering fare, I thought that this can be helpful for anyone who is getting started in the hobby. Plus, it actually has me building my layout. So if this is something that you find helpful, then please click on subscribe and the little bell icon that appears if you want to be notified anytime I put out a new video. If you click on the show more in the area below this video, you can also check out some of the helpful links on the social media or my Amazon page that features some of the track sets that you see here in case you can't find them at your local hobby shop. So thanks so much for watching, good luck, and may you keep on track.